This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/mapperforward to find out how you can become a member today. Sarada Krishnan, welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro for your first time on the podcast. It is such a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
We are going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff around food security and coffee crops and things like that. Before we get started, could you tell people about your amazing history? I'm a big fan. I do have to say this. I'm a little bit of a fangirl over here, so this is a very exciting conversation for me. So please tell us a little bit about what you do.
So yeah, I am originally from India, and I got my undergraduate degree in horticulture from India. Mm-hmm. And I have an uncle who is a big agricultural scientist in India, Dr. M.S. Swaminathan. Mm-hmm. And he has been a great inspiration to me. And he worked with Dr. Norman Borlaug to bring about the Green Revolution in India and was the winner of the World Food Prize, the first winner of the World Food Prize.
Wow.
So he's been a great inspiration to me and to bring about food security and nutrition security to people. Uh-huh. So and I came to the United States about 36 years ago to do my master's. And for my master's, eventually I did my PhD a little bit later in life. And so for my PhD work, I worked on the genetic diversity of wild coffee species in Madagascar. Madagascar alone has about 60 species of coffea. Wow. And a majority of them are critically endangered. I picked Madagascar because I'm very interested in biodiversity conservation and also interested in coffee with my family owning coffee farms growing up in India. And when I did my research in Madagascar, I found out that they had a high diversity of coffea species in Madagascar. So I worked on 4 different species, looking at the genetic diversity of plants that are conserved in what we call gene banks, which mm-hmm. is like we either conserve them as seeds or as plants in field gene banks, either a seed gene bank or a field gene bank. And because coffee has to be conserved in the field, they will not store as seeds for a very long time. So I was working in Madagascar, looking at the plants in the gene bank and comparing the genetic diversity to those same plants growing in the wild forests of Madagascar to make conservation recommendations. And since my PhD, I've worked on coffee genetic resources in South Sudan, and also working with the Global Crop Diversity Trust and World Coffee Research, developed the Global Coffee Conservation Strategy.
And you're about to move to a new job.
Yes, I am. I have been working with the Denver Botanic Gardens as the Director of Horticulture and Global Initiatives for almost 16 years.
Wow.
And this is a huge move. I am moving to Bonn, Germany to work with the Global Crop Diversity Trust as the Director of Programs. And in addition, I also work as the Executive Director of the International Women's Coffee Alliance. And that's my passion job.
We are lucky to have you as in that position. And that's only a new position, right? It's about a year. Has it been
almost a year? June, it'll be a year. Yeah.
Yeah. We've got a lot to talk about over this series. So it's a series of 5 episodes. And I want to focus this conversation today around the Crop Trust, your new job that you're going to, because I sense that the Map It Forward audience is going to be rather interested in the work that you're doing and what the Crop Trust does. So why don't we talk about what the Crop Trust is and what it does and what you'll be doing while you're over there?
Okay. The Global Crop Diversity Trust, maybe if I can pause the recording, can I get on the websites?
Yes, absolutely. And what we'll do is we'll include a link to the website because the website has like these amazing dramatic photos of big, massive buildings in Antarctica storing seeds for the future of the world when the apocalypse happens. It's really, it's really fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. So, it's easy. So the Global Crop Diversity Trust, it's known as the Crop Trust for short.
Yep.
It was established around, when was it? About 2000, in the early 2010s. Let's see. About 2000, early 2000s.
Yep.
And it was established by Bioversity International, which is part of the CGIAR centers. The CGIAR stands for the Consultative Group of International Agricultural Research. And also it was established by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization to provide support for the global food system. So that way it is much more sustainable and the way they are doing it is through the establishment of a crop diversity endowment fund. And so the endowment fund provides grants to all the CG centers because there are about 14 or 15 CGIAR centers around the world. Examples are the International Rice Research Institute in Manila, Philippines, or the SIP, which is the Potato Center in Peru, and SIMNET is the Wheat and Maize Center in Mexico. So all of these CGIAR centers, so they work collaboratively with the Crop Trust. The Crop Trust is an endowment fund that provides funding to all of these centers to ensure that the crop diversity is protected for the future generations.
So for the sake of people who are unaware, and we are going to talk about food security in a future episode. Why don't we help people understand the definitions of some of the terms that are associated with why this has happened? So what is food security and why are we talking about food security in the world right now?
Sorry, my dog.
Your puppy's answering the question for you.
Food security is that all of us have enough food to ensure that we can perform. Oh, I apologize. I did not even prepare for this.
No problem at all. But in general, if we tie this back to coffee, right? We have this general understanding that there's always going to be plenty of coffee, and that what we're going through right now in the world with the drop in the yield of coffee, it's just a cyclical thing. But that's not necessarily true, is it? It's not definitive that this is a cyclical thing or that this is going to be permanent. As we're seeing with a lot of crops around the world, there is climate change, there is the effects of pesticides, there is monocrop cultures that have really eroded the quality of soils. It's going to take a whole bunch of time. If we do put the effort into regenerating our soils, it's going to take some time to get food security to where it needs to be to, right?
Yes, definitely. We all need food, but within the foods, you have the staple foods like rice and wheat.
Right.
And that can fill you up, but it does not give you all the nutrition that you need. And so then you really need to having a diet. So in addition to food security, it also is nutrition security.
Right.
To ensure that you're getting all the needed nutrients that you need to survive, thrive in our society.
So calorie density.
The calorie density, not just calorie dense, but also the
nutrition density.
Nutrition also,
right.
Because for the development of a brain, or if you don't get enough beta carotene, you are going to get eye problems, vision problems.
Right.
So food security consists of ensuring that all of us have a healthy diet that allows us to thrive in this world.
Right. And if we can bring it back to coffee, if we're talking about another term that we could define, which is crop diversity, why is it, as you were mentioning about Madagascar, why is crop diversity important in things like coffee?
Crop diversity, because if we want to mitigate the impacts of climate change, we really need to have this crop diversity to help us see through the changes that are going to come about. So an example is drought. So
Right.
coffee is very sensitive to drought. And so if it is continued drought for multiple years, that is going to lead to lack of harvest and crop and income to the farmers, which leads to food insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really need to look at the crop diversity, whether if you're talking about Arabica coffee, within Arabica coffee, as well as outside the species, there are 130 species of coffea. So
Right.
looking at the diversity outside of Arabica coffee as well is
Mm-hmm.
very important, because that is how you can build resilience into the crop. Because an example is Coffea racemosa, which
Mm-hmm.
is highly drought tolerant. And
Right.
so finding out what might be that adaptive gene within Coffea racemosa that gives it adaptation to drought.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can develop breeding programs to incorporate that gene into Arabica coffee to make it more resilient to drought conditions.
Right. And I guess coffee leaf rust is another example of why crop diversity is really important. There are certain strains that are seeming to be more resistant to coffee leaf rust than others. And so, as we've recently been talking about on this podcast, this is threatening the viability of different producers' livelihoods and therefore the supply of coffee as a food.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So a perfect example is in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Coffee leaf rust hit Sri Lanka in the 1800s. And Sri Lanka used to be a big coffee producer.
Okay.
And because of the coffee leaf rust, it wiped out the entire coffee industry in Sri Lanka, and they switched to tea. But when a crop it's a huge investment. It's a long-term investment for a farmer, because when you plant a coffee tree, you don't get your first harvest until it's 3 or 4 years. And by the time you get full production, it's 5 to 7 years. And when a farmer has already invested that much time into it to change to another crop, it takes time and resources.
Right.
So when your coffee leaf rust comes and wipes out your coffee, then you are in a dilemma. Do you plant coffee again, or do you switch to another crop? And so that leads to, when a farmer does not get income and who's dependent, a smallholder farmer who's dependent on coffee for their livelihoods, then that will lead, when they don't get any income, that leads to food insecurity.
Right. One other term that I wanted to ask you about that I wasn't quite sure of is this term food sovereignty. What does that mean?
Food sovereignty is, a lot of the crops, they are indigenous to a region.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, due to colonization, these plants have been spread around the world.
Oh.
And so a lot of these indigenous crops, so that is what the whole Convention on Biological Diversity came about in 1992, the Convention of Biological Diversity. So, and as part of that convention was another law that came into effect was the Nagoya Protocol for access and benefit sharing.
Okay.
So the sovereignty, it belongs to the region or the country where it came from. And so it is the part of the access and benefit sharing is when you take a genetic resource from a country, mm-hmm. and so you need to give back something to the country as part of the access and benefit sharing. So that way, through colonization, a lot of indigenous communities have lost their crops. Right. Because they've become more global.
Right. And so the people who are taking that genetic material and have the resources to turn it into an industry, they're the ones who are going to benefit from having
yes.
Okay, great. Okay. We're going to wrap up this episode, and then in the next episode, I'd like to deep dive a little bit with you on crop diversity, because there's a lot of interesting work being done in coffee around crop diversity, and particularly in the genetics of crop diversity. Mm-hmm. So how about we explore that more in the next episode?
Sounds good.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.